Hello and welcome to Laex Excellence Hyderabad and Bengaluru. This is the daily news analysis for 15th May 2020. The online live general studies prelims cum mains batch 2021 has started. The admissions for the same have started. Please direct your queries to the numbers given below. As usual, the discussion is divided into daily editorial enrichment program, which covers the editorial articles, and TNA or the targeted news analysis, which consists of all the other important articles in the newspaper. So the title for the first article in our discussion is Stop the Return to Laissez-faire. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. The issue is related to labor laws and the dimension is related to the rights of the labor and their protection. So this article is basically a continuation of what has been happening in the economy in the past few weeks. Different states are basically amending their labor laws in order to scrape the rights which the labor have. Like for example, yesterday we talked about how Uttar Pradesh government and the Gujarat government and the Madhya Pradesh government have been amending their labor laws in order to decrease the amount of rights or benefits which the workers had. The basic motive behind such scraping of labor laws is to make sure that the economic activity is generated as much as possible, even if it is at the cost of the worker. Now this article basically says that this kind of attitude which is shown by the state governments is showing a return to the laissez-faire economics. So what is this laissez-faire economics? Laissez-faire economics is basically a system or a phenomenon in which the government had very little role to play in regulating the conditions of work of the labor. Everything that happens in terms of the economic activity was determined by the employer or the person or the entrepreneur who used to head the firm. So if I am the head of the firm, I make sure that the conditions of work are in such a way that I can extract as much work as possible by keeping my costs minimum. Now naturally, in such a system, if each employer is only worried about the profitability of the company, whatever be the conditions of work, it is going to evolve an economy in which the rights of the workers are snubbed, the rights of the workers are basically taken away. And this is not good for a democratic country like India, in which the constitution provides certain basic rights, certain human rights for each individual and also for the workers. So we do not want this kind of laissez-faire economics, is what this article in essence is trying to tell us. So this article starts out by giving the recent example of Uttar Pradesh government. So what did the Uttar Pradesh government do? The Uttar Pradesh government has basically passed an ordinance, and this ordinance said that almost all the labor statutes or almost all the labor laws that were there for the protection of the rights of the workers were going to be suspended for a period of 3 years. Some of these important labor laws are 1. Factories Act 1948, 2. Minimum Wages Act 1948, 3. Industrial Establishments Act 1946, 4. Trade Unions Act 1926. So these acts were basically in place to protect the rights of the worker. They used to regulate the conditions of work. They made sure that the worker does not work for more than 8 to 9 hours per day. And if he does overtime, he is given extra money, and he has healthcare benefits, and he has insurance benefits, and so on. These were the rights that were protected by these labor laws, and by suspending these labor laws for a temporary period of 3 years is going to hurt the rights of the worker. This we have seen in previous daily news analysis as well. Now what is new in this particular article is that this article basically draws a comparison between the present move by different states like Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, etc. and the British era. So what is the similarity between the British era and the kind of provisions that we are creating now? So to know that, we have to have a brief background about the labor laws in the colonial era. We will look into them briefly. So here are the labor laws in the colonial era. We had several regulations which made sure that the worker is restricted to his place of work and as much work as can be extracted from him by giving him very minimal wages. So some of the regulations in the British era were, firstly, we had Bengal Regulations 7 of 1819. So this regulation was basically related to British planters as such, especially in Assam and other areas where they used to have tea estates. We all know that in the Assam region, the British used to have tea estates, tea plantations as such. In these plantations, the workers were made to work for a long period of time without any kind of health benefit or health security and so on. And this Bengal regulation of 1819 made sure that this kind of work could be extracted from the worker. Like for example, what did this Bengal regulation 1819 say? This Bengal regulation has said that the worker was to enter into a 5-year contract with the planter. So if I am a worker, I have to sign an upfront agreement that I will work in that particular plantation for a period of 5 years, no matter what. And in between, if I want to leave the place, or if I leave the place or abandon the place of work, then I am punishable by law. This is how the British tried to extract work from the workers by passing such draconian laws. To add this, they also had another act called the Transport of Native Labourers Act 1863. So what did this act do? This act basically increased the control of employers on the workers by making sure that the employers can detain the workers if it is needed, and also the workers can be imprisoned for a period of 6 months if they violate the norms of the work. So this is another draconian law during the British times. In addition to this, they had this Bengal Act of 1865, which basically came up with a special kind of police called the Special Immigration Police. What did the Special Immigration Police do? The Special Immigration Police used to harass the workers. It used to make sure that the workers did not leave the place of work, right? So this kind of draconian provisions used to be quite prevalent in the British era to make sure that the workers gave as much work as possible for very little benefit. There were no regulations of conditions of work. Even if they were working in hazardous areas, there was no protection as such. So by looking at the labor laws, what is the inference that we can derive? The inference that we can derive is that the labor laws in the British era were in such a way that they were totally leaning towards the employer. They did not give any rights to the employees or the workers as such. Now this is the kind of situation which is going to prevail in India in times to come, is what this article is saying. This article is basically saying that we are creating such a draconian system in which the workers will have no rights, and this is going to return to a system of laissez-faire or the system of industrial revolution where the workers used to be exploited to a large extent. Now moving forward, this article talks about whether the suspension of labor laws is legally sound or not. So different states right now have suspended their labor laws. Is it legally sound or not? So there are two relevant Supreme Court judgments here. The first judgment is the Glaxo Laboratories versus the Presiding Officer of 1983. In this particular case, the Supreme Court has said that whatever the contract that is arrived between the employer and the employee, or the employer and the worker, is basically an unequal contract because the negotiating parties are unequal persons. Obviously, the person who gives money, or the employer here, has higher negotiating power compared to the worker. In such a situation, the contract can be drawn in such a way between the employer and the worker that they can extract as much work as possible from the worker. And this is not good for the rights of the worker. In such a situation, whatever contracts are drawn between workers and employers, they have to be statutorily imposed. As in, the state is going to basically impose certain laws which we call as the labor laws, and these labor laws will regulate the conditions of work, and these are going to be the contracts of labor between the labor and the employers. As such, the employers and the employees cannot enter into this contract because these are two unequal persons. This is what this particular Supreme Court judgment has said. Moving forward, we have the Life Insurance Corporation case. In this case also, the Supreme Court has said that the conditions of service of the workers has to be given certain statutory backing by the legislature. And by doing so, the Supreme Court in these two cases has done what? It has made sure that the Parliament had the power to give rise to certain laws which will protect the rights of the workers. This we call as the labor laws, and these are the labor laws which are precisely being set aside by the different state governments that we have at the moment. So this is against the Supreme Court judgment in a manner of speaking. This is the first point. And the second point is in relation to the Factories Act. As we have discussed in previous analysis, Factories Act is basically that overarching act which tries to provide a lot of rights to the workers. But this act has one exception. That is the Section 5 of the Factories Act. This Section 5 of the Factories Act has said that in a situation of public emergency, the employer can do away with the provisions of the Factories Act. That is to say that the Factories Act can be suspended for a period of time in the case of public emergency. And why did it say so? Because in the case of a public emergency, like maybe a war or an external aggression, it is really important to derive as much work as possible so that economic activity can go on. In such a situation, rights of workers as such can be set aside for a period of time. But that kind of public emergency is not present at this point of time. What we have at this moment is basically a health emergency, and it is not a public emergency. So this is also against the law, is what this article has said. Firstly, it is against the Supreme Court judgment. Secondly, it is against the Factories Act provision of section 5 of the Factories Act. So this article basically contests the legality of the steps that have been taken by the recent state governments. So what I'm essentially saying is that whenever you want to generate economic activity, you have to make a balance. You have to make sure that you are able to generate as much economic activity as possible without compromising on the dignity of the labor, without compromising on the rights of the labor. Okay, because they are in the end humans too. They need some rest to they need some rest to recuperate. They need some entertainment. They need to go back to their family and spend time with their family. For all this, their labor conditions have to be regulated. Otherwise, there can arise a situation in which the employer extracts or exploits the worker, which was basically a remnant of the colonial era. It is also a remnant of the laissez-faire economics, which we have seen during the times of industrial revolution. So this is what this article says. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title for the next article of our discussion is States Cannot Be Left to the Center's Mercy. The syllabus connection has been listed here. Please have a look. The issue is related to federal financial architecture and the dimension is related to states' revenues crippled due to GST. So this article basically starts out by talking about a recent telephonic survey which was conducted by Karur MP S. Jyotimani. This person has conducted a telephonic survey of about 30 lakh people in Tamil Nadu. And what was this survey regarding? This survey was regarding the reopening of the liquor shops in the state during the lockdown. So an overwhelming majority, that is nearly 90% of the people have opposed the move. Now the question is, if people are opposed to this move, why did government reopen this liquor shop? It is not just the case of Tamil Nadu. We have the cases of several other states who have opened up their liquor shops in order to mobilize money. So now we will understand why the states had to do it. Because the question is pertinent, because people are against such a move. And whoever is elected in the government are basically supposed to represent the people. They are supposed to represent the interests of the people. But if they are reopening the liquor shops, which is against the people's mandate, why is this the case? Why is such a situation arise is what this article starts out by discussing. So this article says that initially states do not have any money. The reason why they have opened the liquor shops is because it generates a lot of money for them. It generates a lot of excise revenue. They can mobilize this money and they can use this money as a resource to do whatever the welfare schemes they have to do to conduct their operations well and so on. That is why they have had to reopen their liquor shops. Now the article also talks about the condition of GST and the problems which are imposed by GST on the states. So before GST, the states used to have sales tax and other taxes in their hand, right? Under GST, they had to subsume a lot of indirect taxes, almost all indirect taxes to the center. And before GST, they used to have the powers of taxation. And if COVID came in such a situation, they would have naturally increased the sales taxes, etc., because that was within their powers, and then they would have mobilized the money. But that is not possible now because they have no powers of taxation, because all the indirect taxes have been subsumed under GST. So effectively states do not have any areas on which they can tax, from which they can raise the revenue in order to fight the pandemic or conduct the government. The only avenue which they have left is petroleum products. They have some powers on lottery tickets, some taxes that they can levy on lottery tickets, and electricity and so on. But the problem right now is that because of lockdown, nobody is going out, so petroleum is not being consumed. Electricity, whatever is consumed, the tax that is levied on electricity cannot be increased to a large extent. And the lottery tickets that we have, they don't sell enough in order to create so much of revenue for the government of the state. In such a situation, the only revenue that is left out for the states is alcohol, which is why these alcohol shops are being opened by the states. So this article basically states that because of GST, These states are suffering right now because they do not have powers of taxation in certain areas. Now, does it mean that GST is wrong? No. GST is basically a move which was supposed to create a one market economy, which was supposed to increase economic efficiency and boost the GDP growth to a large extent. But the problem that is created right now is because the center is not giving money to the states. There are certain provisions in the GST which protect the interests of the state. The states have given away their powers of taxation, right? And in return, the center has said a few things. Firstly, there is this concept of GST compensation fund under which the center will compensate the states for the money that they are going to lose. And that money is not being paid at the moment. That is the problem. Secondly, the center has also said in the case of a fall of a tax revenue in the states, because they have given away their powers under GST, the center is going to give certain amounts of tax breaks, certain amount of incentive. That is also not being done. So because the center is not taking care of the state, the center is not fulfilling its promises under GST, the states are facing this problem. And the states do not have any other revenue to tax, any other avenue to tax, so they are taxing alcohol from which they are deriving the money. Now this is what this article starts out by saying. So what it essentially is saying is that the center should give the money that it is supposed to give to the states. Now the next question is, where else do we get the money from? Where else can the state get the money from? Firstly, can they borrow money from outside or wherever it is? States can certainly borrow the money, but they have to do it with the permission of the government, which is the central government. Either they have to take the permission of the central government, or the central government has to stand a guarantee for whatever the loan the states have taken, for whatever borrowings the state have taken. So their borrowing capacity is restricted by this constitutional provision, which basically says that the state has to take the center's approval. And in addition to this, even if the states have the center's approval to borrow money, who is going to give money to these states? At the moment, all states are almost bankrupt. Nobody is really sure about the repaying capacity of the state. If I give money to the state, I am not sure whether the state will give me back the money or it will not give me the money back. That is because the repaying capacity of the state is severely undermined at the moment, because no state is doing well. In such a situation, they will not be able to raise much money even if they were to borrow money. So this article tells this also, and then it moves forward and concludes this discussion by saying that the center should basically fulfill its promises for the state to decrease the dependency of the states on the center or on alcohol. So the title for the present article is Keeping Asia Pacific Afloat. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. The issue is related to Asia Pacific Ocean and the dimension is related to environment pollution in the region. So this article basically talks about ocean-based pollution, especially in Asia Pacific region, and how it is affecting the economies over there. Before we move into it, some background about Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, which we call it in short form as ESCAP, is important. This is basically a regional hub of the United Nations, and this organization promotes cooperation among various countries that are there in that particular region to reach sustainable development, to reach inclusive and sustainable development. It has 53 member states and 9 associate members. Its main focus is related to sustainable development, and it releases reports from time to time, and it works for the betterment of sustainable development in the Asia Pacific region. It is an organization which is particular to the Asia and Pacific. Now, it was established when? It was established in 1947, and the headquarters are present in Bangkok, Thailand. The headquarters of different organizations, be it Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, etc., all the headquarters are usually important for your prelims. And in this particular case, the headquarters of UNESCAP is basically located in Bangkok, Thailand. So it works to overcome some of the region's greatest challenges. The greatest challenges of Asia Pacific region in terms of environmental pollution, in terms of unsustainability in fishing and so on. These are the areas it usually works on. It undertakes certain projects and it tries to deliver results of sustainable development. It provides technical assistance and capacity building to the states that are present in Asia Pacific region to carry forward the mandate of sustainable development. With this brief background, we will jump into this article. This article talks about the unsustainability of whatever is happening in the Asia Pacific region and how they are conducting themselves. In the Asia Pacific region, the food, livelihood, and the sense of identity is all related to the ocean, especially in the coastal communities of the Pacific Island states. And in these regions, if we look at the kind of pollution that we have, be it in terms of plastic pollution, be it in terms of unsustainable fishing, be it in terms of the industrial effluents that are released, all of these are very high and it is creating a lot of problem. There is also this problem of climate change and an increase in sea level rise. Because of climate change and the melting of the global icebergs, the sea level is increasing, and the Pacific states are basically losing their land to this rise in sea level. This is another problem. So what are the different kinds of problem which we have identified in relation to the Pacific Island states? One of them is climate change. Second is unsustainable resource utilization, overfishing, marine plastic pollution, and so on. And UNESCP is basically an organization which precisely fights these problems. Now moving forward, if you look at the present situation, because of COVID-19, the pollution levels all over the world have come down to a large extent. The same is the case in Asia Pacific region. The pollution levels are moderately decreasing in that particular region, but it is only a temporary pause. Once COVID-19 dissipates, when economies of different world and especially in the Asia Pacific region return to normalcy, the pollution levels are going to increase, and this is not good. This article tells us that we have to create a new normal. We have to create a new reality which makes sure that the sustainable development is in the forefront of whatever economic activity they take up. But then this article points out a problem in relation to such kind of policies. Even if we want to come up with good policies, environmentally sustainable policies, if the Pacific Island states want to come up with certain policies, their policies have to be based on some data. They need to have the data about how much of overfishing is happening. They need to have data about how much of marine pollution is there in their particular region, so that they can set certain targets and achieve their targets. But the problem is we do not have such data, because the national governments were either reluctant or they did not have the capacity as such. Because of these several reasons, there is no proper data in relation to the unsustainability in terms of the Asia Pacific region. So the first thing we need to have is the data, so that sustainable development goals can be achieved by setting very reasonable targets. Now moving forward, this article gives out certain measures to make sure that unsustainability can be handled, especially in the Asia Pacific region. Firstly, national policies have to be evolved. National policies have to be evolved in different states of the Asia Pacific region to meet the sustainable development targets. Like for example, take the example of India. India is basically a coastal state. What are the different kinds of statutes that it has? It has Wildlife Protection Act, it has Environment Protection Act, it has Air Act, Water Cess Act, and so on. So I'm just taking the example of India to show that how national policies can evolve in order to protect the biodiversity in that particular region. Now I want you to tell me if India is a member of UNESCP or not. Write it down in the comment section. Now moving forward, this article tells us that different states have to evolve national policies to fight the problems that are there in relation to the marine pollution, in relation to overfishing, and so on. And in addition to this, these countries of the Asia Pacific region have to coordinate among themselves, also evolve regional frameworks which will be used to tackle the problem of unsustainable development in these regions. They have to evolve a common shipping policy. So that green shipping becomes the norm. Green shipping is that kind of shipping which has very little environmental impact, which has very little negative environmental impact. So this is what this article says. The way forward is to develop a regional partnership and also develop national policies to handle the problem. So the title for the present article is Lockdown Syndrome. The syllabus connection has been listed here. The issue is related to the COVID-19 lockdown, and the dimension is the effects of lockdown on the economy. This article basically talks about the recent index of industrial production. Let's see what it says. So before we jump into this article, we will have a brief background about index of industrial production. So what is this index of industrial production? Index of industrial production is basically a metric. It is a metric to measure something. Like for example, if you want to measure the inflation in the economy, you have indicators like the consumer price index, which is the CPI, or you have the wholesale price index, which is the WPI, and sometimes you also use the GDP deflator and so on. So what are all these things? These are basically metrics that are used to find the inflation in the economy. Similarly, if you want to look at the industrial output in the economy and how it has increased over a period of time or how it has decreased over a period of time, you need to have a metric, and that metric is nothing but the index of industrial production. So the index of industrial production is basically an index that shows the growth rates in the different industry groups of the economy over a fixed period of time. In this particular fixed period of time, what is the growth in different industries is what this particular index of industrial production or IIP basically tells us. So this index of industrial production or IIP is released by the Central Statistical Organization or the CSO, and this CSO comes under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now this IIP is basically a composite indicator. We have said that IIP measures the kind of growth in different industry groups that are there. So the different industry groups are basically what? They are basically mining, manufacturing and electricity. So in these three sectors, in these three broad sectors, what is the growth that we are witnessing? Is it a positive growth or is it a negative growth, etc., etc., is what is being told by this index of industrial production. So with this background, we will understand what this article is trying to tell us. This article basically says that the index of industrial production has contracted by as much as 15% in the recent times. This is mostly because of the lockdown restrictions. Because of lockdown restrictions, no production was taking place. The workers could not go to the factories. The miners could not go to the mines and so on, because of which the industrial activity has come to a standstill, and that is why the index of industrial production has fallen to such an extent. This article explains further by saying that the manufacturing sector, which is a component of IIP, has witnessed a contraction of about as high as 20%, and it is one of the most badly hit sectors in terms of poor performance in the industry groups that are there. And capital goods and consumer durables, etc., are also have also faced a decline. In fact, they have faced a decline of about 1/3. And the experts are saying what? The experts are saying that this industrial output is going to fall further in the month of April and times to come forward. This is what this article says, and in order to make sure that the industrial production is revived, we have to generate economic activity as fast as possible. But previous attempts of RBI or the government to flush the system with liquidity have failed. So in such a situation, the hope is that the recent economic package by the Prime Minister is going to help the sectors of the economy, especially the industrial sector. So the hope is after a period of time, once this COVID crisis dissipates, the economy will return to normalcy and the index of industrial production will come back to as usual. Now this is what the article says. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title of this article is Migrant Workers to Get Free Food Grains. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. The issue is related to the second tranche of the stimulus, and the dimension is the focus on migrant workers. So this article starts out by talking about the second tranche of the economic stimulus package that was announced by the Union Finance Minister. Of course, the economic package was initially talked about. The basic skeleton of that economic package was discussed by the Prime Minister in his concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat, but the nut and bolt of the same was given by the Finance Minister. And under this second tranche of economic stimulus package, we have the following provisions. The government wants to provide free food grains for the next 2 months for the migrant workers who do not have ration cards. For this purpose, the center is going to spend a money of about 3,500 crores. So these migrant workers who do not have ration cards will also be able to achieve food grains. Next is the extension of credit facilities for urban housing, the street vendors that are there, and the farmers, and an interest subvention scheme for small businesses. So these are the steps that are being given as a part of the economic stimulus package to support these people, to support urban housing, to support street vendors and so on, by giving them credit facility, by giving them access to money. And the next point is for the returning workers, For all those peoples who are returning, the migrant workers who are presently there, they are going back to their homes, right? They do not have any work at the place of their employment because of lockdown restrictions, so they are going back home. For these returning workers, in order to ensure their livelihood, Manrega is basically being resumed, and this Manrega in rural areas is going to subsume all these migrant workers who are going to come back home. So that is the basic gist of the article. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title for the present article is India reminds China of claims over Gilgit-Baltistan. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to Gilgit-Baltistan and the dimension is Chinese contract to build a dam in the Gilgit-Baltistan region. So before we jump into what this article says, we'll have a brief background about where Gilgit-Baltistan is located. You can see it in the map. So it is basically being currently controlled by Pakistan. It is an area in the northern Pakistan region. So this Gilgit-Baltistan region borders several countries. In fact, it borders China in the north, it borders Afghanistan in the west, Tajikistan in the northwest, and Kashmir in the southeast. So you can see the number of countries this particular territory is basically bordering. In such a situation, in such a context, the inference that we are supposed to draw is that country, that particular region which has borders with so many regions is strategically important. So naturally different countries would want to control this particular region. But the fact is, Gilgit-Baltistan is supposed to be a part of India. It is a natural part of India since the times of independence, but at present it is in the disputed region with Pakistan, and Pakistan is basically controlling this particular area. So what does the article say? The article basically talks about the recent contract which has been taken by China. China Power Company. China Power is basically a company in China. It is called Power China. So this company has received a contract. It has received a contract to build a dam in the disputed Gilgit-Baltistan region. So India reminded China that this is not right because that area of Gilgit-Baltistan region is supposed to be our control. This is what is the essence of the article. So to highlight, what did we learn? Power China, which is basically one of the biggest Chinese power companies, received a contract to build the dam in Gilgit-Baltistan region. The name of the dam is Diyamar Bhasha Dam. This is the dam which Power China is about to construct in the Gilgit-Baltistan region for Pakistan. The benefit of this particular dam is that once completed, it will allow Pakistan to use the waters of the Indus water for irrigation. So Pakistan will be able to use waters from the Indus river for its irrigation purpose and increase the agricultural productivity in this particular region. Also, it will be able to control the floods in the downstream region of Pakistan. But whatever be the case, this particular region of Gilgit-Baltistan itself is supposed to be a part of India. Presently, it is under Pakistan occupied Kashmir or POK, which is fine. But then it is basically a disputed territory, and when you have a disputed territory, no other third party should come and take up projects in that particular territory. And this is what India is trying to remind China, and that we have done. And now let's move on to the next article. So the title for the present article is NHRC issues notices to the states. The syllabus connection is listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to NHRC. The dimension is the violation of human rights. So before jumping into the article, we will have a brief background about NHRC. This body is really important for the prelims. Even if you look at the mains question papers, I think it was in 2016, I guess. So in 2016 or 2015, there was a question on NHRC and its functioning. Anyway, let us have a brief background about NHRC. NHRC is basically that body which protects the human rights as such. So every person, by virtue of being a human, has certain rights. He has some dignity that has to be protected, and these dignity are protected through certain rights that are given to him. These are called as human rights. Human rights, of course, have evolved over a period of times, from ancient times to medieval times to modern times, from first generation, second generation to third generation. All that is not relevant, but human rights is basically that set of rights which ensures the dignity of a human being. So NHRC in India tries to protect the human rights of a person, and it is a statutory body, and it was set up by the Human Rights Act. Now this body is said to be called as the watchdog of the human rights in our country. In order to protect the human rights, it is supposed to have some powers. Yes, so if their body has been set up with certain responsibilities, in order to undertake its responsibilities, it needs to have certain powers. So certain functions and powers of NHRCs are the following. Firstly, NHRC takes into account the grievances that are given by different people. So if there are violation of human rights anywhere inside the country, then NHRC takes up that issue. So this taking up of that issue can be done if that person comes and complain to an NHRC, or NHRC can do it by itself. Like for example, in relation to prisoners and the living conditions of prisoners in jails, NHRC has taken a suo motu cognizance, and NHRC has taken its own steps to investigate that particular issue. So it can act based upon certain petition that it receives, or it can act upon suo motu. And also it has the power to interfere with any judicial proceeding involving the allegations of human rights. So you can interfere judicial proceedings as well. Also, it has the powers to visit jails or any other institutions under the control of governments to see if human rights are properly functioning or not. It has the powers of civil court and so on. These are certain other reports or other powers of NHRC. With this brief background, we will jump into what this article says. This article basically is a ball by ball commentary. And what I mean by that is, anytime something goes wrong, anytime there is a violation of human rights, NHRC usually sends notices to the government, and that is what it has done at this point of time also. So there are two problems here, two problems which have identified by NHRC. Firstly, it has sent out a notice to the Madhya Pradesh government. This is in relation to the migrant worker. There was a pregnant migrant worker who has given birth on the road, and this situation was taken cognizance by NHRC, and it has sent a notice to the Madhya Pradesh government. What are you doing? Why is this pregnant migrant worker giving birth on the road? This is against the concept of human rights. This is one notice it has given. The second notice has been given to the Maharashtra government, and this is related to the inappropriate approach adopted for the release of prisoners. So some of the prisoners were released to prevent the spread of SARS-CoV or COVID-19 infection, but the way in which these prisoners were handled by the police was not right. This was in violation of their human rights, and so the NHRC has served a notice to Maharashtra government as well. So this is the gist of the article. Now let's move forward. So here are the MCQs for the day. The first question is the following. The finance minister said in a statement, "One nation, one ration card will be fully implemented from March 2021. In this context, consider the benefits of this scheme." First option, all beneficiaries, especially migrants, can access PDS across the nation from any PDS shop of their own choice. This is right. This is the basic concept of one nation, one ration card. Now let's look at the second option. It's ration card will be integrated to the Aadhaar platform. This is not right. No such provision is there under this particular one nation, one ration card. So the answer is just one, or the first option, because it is asking for the correct answer. Next, in the context of the recent blowout for state governments in terms of revenue, state governments have power to raise taxes directly on which of these items? They do have power on petroleum products, they have power on land registration, vehicle registration, and lottery tickets. We have discussed about these things in a passing reference. Petroleum products ke hisab se they have power, but there is no movement of vehicles as such, so there isn't much less money from this particular area. Neither there is money from lottery area nor land registration or vehicle registration, because all of them are not doing well at this particular point, which is why the states are resorting to alcohol, right? Which is why the states are resorting to taxing opening liquor shops so that they can derive as much excise revenue as possible. So the answer anyway is option 1, 2, 3, 4. So this completes the discussion for the day. Thank you for your participation. We'll meet again.